Hey everyone, in this video we will look into how we can add a date picker into our Android app. So here I have created this new project, and in this new project I have added one dependency. Go to this version catalog file, and here is the dependency for this Kotlin-X datetime library. So in this project we will use this library for the datetime utility. You can get this from the GitHub repository, and here is the version of this, and you also need to add this in your module level build.gradle file here and sync the project. And here in our main activity, let's create first a composable function with the name something like custom date picker. And here let's use one column layout, and in this column layout first use a date picker from this material 3, and in this date picker we need to provide the state. So here let's create a state, and for this date picker state we have this function remember date picker state, and we can use it here, and we need to annotate this function with this experimental API annotation. And after this, let's take a text composable function, and in that let's use the text selected, and here we will show the selected date, so we can get the selected date from the state. So let's use that state dot selected date millis, and here let's also use modifier with fill max size, and let's also align horizontally and vertically in the center. Now use our custom date picker in our main activity, and let's run our app and see how it's working. So here we have one date picker. You see how it's easy to have a date picker in our app. Now let's customize this date picker. First thing, you see on this date picker there is no selected date. So we can also specify that whenever this date picker appears, there should be some initially selected date. So here in our remember date picker state function, we have few parameters, and one of them is initial selected date millis. Suppose if we want the current date to be initially selected, so here we can provide the current date from this function system.currentTime millis. So this function will give us the current date time in milliseconds, and we can use it here. Now let me run it again. Now you see we have a selected date in our date picker, and we can select any other date also. And from here we can select the year. And this is how we switch the months. Next, before customizing any further this date picker, let's have understanding on some terminology used related to the date time. In real life, we talk about time like 24 May 2025, 5:30 p.m. But in programming, we need to represent this using numbers so that computers can understand and calculate with it. And first we have time millis or epoch time. It's the number of milliseconds that have passed since 1st January 1970. For example, if we call this code, it will return a value like this, which means a particular date at a particular time. And this is how computers store time internally as a long number. Next we have time zone. Our time zone tells us where on earth our time value belongs. If it's this number in UTC, that could be 3:30 p.m. in India or 6 a.m. in New York. So the same time millis means different times for people in different countries. Time zone lets us show time correctly according to the user's location. Next we have instant. An instant represents a specific point in time without any time zone. It helps us standardize time before converting it into a human readable format. Then we have local date time. It's a combination of date and time based on user's time zone. This is what users are used to seeing. It's easier for them to understand this date than this number. Here we are providing this initial selected date, the current date with this code. What if we want to set the initial date some specific date? So that we will specify with the help of Kotlin X datetime API. So here let's create a date in millisecond. So let's name it initial date millis. And here first we will specify the date with the help of this local date from this Kotlin X datetime. And we can specify the year, month and day of month. So let's select 2025 January 15. Let's use 1. Right now we have the local date, but we need the date in the milliseconds. So first we will convert this local date into an instant. So here let's use this function at start day of in. And this function needs the time zone. So let's specify the time zone from this Kotlin X datetime, and let's use this UTC, Universal Time Coordinates. Now we have the instant of this particular date and we need the milliseconds, so we can simply convert these instant to epoch milliseconds, and we can use these here, initial date millis, and let's comment out this part. Now let's run our app and see. And you see we have this particular date as the initially selected date. Next thing you see that we are using this text composable to get the selected date, but this state function is giving the selected date in the milliseconds, but we need to convert these milliseconds into a human readable date. So for that, let's create a function that will convert these milliseconds into a date string of particular format. So here, let's create one function, and this will be an extension function on this nullable long type, because this selected date millis of type nullable long. So we are going to use this function on the selected date millis, and let's name it to formatted date string, and this function will return us the string. So here what we were doing, first we have the local date, then we were converting that to the instant, then the milliseconds. Now we have the milliseconds, then first we will convert into instant, then the local date. So here first get the instant from these millisecond, so instant, and here we will use this instant from this Kotlin X datetime. And here we have this function from epoch milliseconds, and let's provide the milliseconds with the help of this keyword. Because this function is an extension function on this long type, we can get this value from this keyword, and this value can be null. So in that case, let's provide the default value of current date with the help of this system.currentTime millis. Now we have the instant. Now let's get the date from this instant. So we have this instant and we have this function to local date time, and this needs the time zone. So let's get the time zone from the user's device with the help of this time zone dot current system default. Now we have the local date time, but we are only concerned about the local date, not the time part. So we can simply get the date. Now we have the local date. Next, we need to convert this local date into a date string. So we need to define a particular format in which we need the date string. So in this Kotlin X datetime API, we can specify the format in a very flexible way. So let's get this formatter, and we have this formatter on this local date. And here we have the format block, and here we can specify the date format whatever we want. So suppose we need the format like 25 to 2025. First the date, then the slash, then the month, and then the year. So here we can say first we need the day of month, and by default it has the padding 0, meaning for the 1 to 9 it will already append the 0 before that. And then we need the character with the slash, and then we need the month. Let's use this month number, and then again we need the slash character, and then we need the year. Now we have this particular format, so let's use this formatter and format our date and use this return keyword. Now let's use this function here. We can simply call this function to format a date string, and let's run our app. And here you see we have a formatted date string, and if we select any other date, and we will get that particular date. So here we can also keep these format in a single line with these semicolon. Now suppose we need some different date format, something like January to 2025. So let's define this particular format. So here first we need the month name. So let's use this month name, and here we need to specify what type of month name we want. We need the full name or we need the abbreviation of that month name. So we need the abbreviation, so let's use this month names dot English abbreviated. And then we need the space, so let's use the character with space. And then we need the day of month, and then we need the comma, then we need the space, and then the year. So let's comment out this format and run the app again. Now you see we have this particular format of our date string, and if we select any other date, then we have that date. So you see how easy it is to define the date format. Next thing, here on our date picker you see a pencil icon. So if we click on it, then this date picker will switch into the date input. So here we can also input this date. So suppose if we want the date 25 September 2005, and this is how we can input this date. And if we click on this calendar icon, then it will switch back to the picker. So here on our state we can also specify that initially what should be the state of this date picker. So here let's use the comma and enter, and use the initial display mode. And here we can specify the display mode, and we have two options. We can select this input, and if we run our app again, now you see our date picker is starting with this display mode input. Initially we can also switch it afterwards, and we can also disable this button. So suppose let's change back to this picker, and here on this date picker we have one property with the name show mode toggle, and by default it has the true value, so we can specify this false. Now you see we don't have any toggle mode on this date picker. Here let's keep the true value. Next thing, many a times we want users to select the dates of a particular range. Suppose we don't want user to select any past dates. Only user can select the future dates or present date. So for that we can specify the selected dates here. We have a parameter with the name selected dates. And this selected dates parameter accepts this selected dates interface. So let's implement that interface. And here use this object and name it future or present selectable dates. And we need to implement this selectable dates interface. And press Ctrl O, and we need to override these two functions. So here first thing we need to annotate this object with this annotation. And here we need to first specify that what should be the selectable dates, and next what should be the selectable years. So here first let's get the today's date and use this private val today. And for this first we need to get the instant of today. So we can get from this clock, from this Kotlin X datetime, and here we have this function system now, and this will give us the today's instant, but we need the date, so we can convert this instant to local date time, and this need the time zone. So here create one time zone with the help of this time zone dot current system default and use it here. And this will give us the local date time, but we need only the date, so we can get this. So here in this is selectable year function, we can simply say that the year user is trying to select should be greater than or equal to the today's date year. So this year value will get from this date picker, and we are comparing that year from this today's date year. Next thing, to these selectable dates, this date picker will give us the time in milliseconds. So first convert these milliseconds into the date, so we can compare this date from this today's date. So let's get the date from these milliseconds, and first get the instant dot from epoch milliseconds, and let's pass our milliseconds and convert this into the two local date time with the time zone, and we need the date. Now we can simply convert this date from this today's date. So whatever is users trying to select, the date should be greater than or equal to the today's date. And this is how we implement this selectable dates interface, and we can pass simply here future or present dates. Now run our app again. So now we have our date picker, and you see it has disabled all the past dates. And also if we open these years, it has disabled all the past years. We can only select the present and future years. So let's click on this 25, and we can select only from this 21st June. So this is today's date, and we can only select now onward. Now next, suppose if we want only the user to select the past or present dates, so we can simply change the sign. So here we can say whatever date user is trying to select, that should be less than or equal to today's date. Same with the year, and run it again. Now open these years, and we can see we can only select the past years and also the past dates, like this. So let's change back the sign. And on this date picker, on the top you see we have a title select date. We can also customize this. So here on our date picker, we have one parameter with the name title. by default it keeps these title value. So let's customize this, and here use the title parameter and use a text composable. With this text, select your birthday and also give some padding to this text and run it again. And here we have a date picker with this title, select your birthday. So this is how we customize this title. And here as of now we are simply keeping this date picker as a permanent composable into this screen. But most of the time we need to implement this as a date picker dialog. So this date picker will only show when user click any particular button. So next we will add the date picker dialog. So here before this text composable, let's create one button. And in this button let's use a text, simply choose date. And outside our column layout we need to use the dialog. And for our date picker we have one particular dialog with the name date picker dialog. And here we need to provide few things like this on dismiss request and the confirm button, and next we have the dismiss button, and then we have the content, and remove these parentheses. So our date picker dialog content will be our date picker. So let's cut this date picker from here and use this as the content of our date picker dialog. And for this confirm button and this dismiss button, we generally use the text button for these, so they should not be more prominent. So here we need to provide the on click, and here simply let's use the text select for this confirm button, and for this dismiss button let's use the text cancel. So here we have the date picker dialog. Next thing we need to define when this dialog will open and when this dialog will disappear. So for that let's create one state within this composable function, and let's name it is date picker open, and use this by keyword with this remember savable, and we will use this mutable state flow, and by default we will keep the false value of this state, and import this get value, and we need to keep this where, and we also need to import the set value. So here we have one state, and this dialog should not be open all the time. It should be only open when this value is true. So let's put this inside this if block and use this date picker inside this if block. So first, when this dialog will open, when user will click this choose date button. So here let's update our is date picker open state to true. So when this value will be true, this dialog will open. And next thing, when user will click either the select button or the cancel button, in both these cases we need to disappear the dialog. So here we can make this value false and put this in a single line, and same let's do here. And we also have one parameter on dismiss request, and this will be trigger when user will try to dismiss the dialog either by clicking outside the dialog or by pressing the back button. So in this case also we will update our is date picker value to false, and now run our. Now instead of that permanent date picker we have a button. So let's click on this button, and we have the date picker in a dialog form, and we can select the date here. Suppose let's select this date, and when we click on this select button, the dialog will disappear and we have the selected date. And again let's choose another date. If we click outside this dialog, this will disappear, And if we click the cancel button, again this will disappear. And we can also input the date. And this is how we implement the date picker dialog. One last thing I need to show you. First, let's open this date picker and rotate our screen. Now you see our date picker dialog is not fully visible. User cannot select all the dates because we don't have enough height to place all the dates. But we can use the date input here. So on the landscape mode, we can do one workaround. So here we can simply make this date picker dialog scrollable. So on the landscape mode, user can simply scroll the date picker to select the date. So here let's use this modifier, and we have one modifier with the name vertical scroll, and it needs the state. So let's simply use remember scroll state and run our app again. Now let's open our date picker, and here we can simply scroll our dialog and select any particular date. And on the landscape mode, this date input works fine because it has the enough height. So this was all about the date picker. If you have found the video helpful, please consider subscribing the channel and like the video. Thanks again for watching. Happy coding, and I will see you in the next one.